Good morning. This is the 11th week of Ordinary Time, and we read the Gospel of Mark. He also said, "This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground. Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he doesn't know how. All by itself, the soil produces grain, first the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it because the harvest has come." Again he said, "What shall we say the kingdom of God is like? Or what parable shall we use to describe it? It's like a mustard seed, which is the smallest of all seeds on earth. Yet, when planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all garden plants, with such big branches that the birds can perch in its shade." With many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them, as much as they could understand. He didn't say anything to them without using a parable, but when he was alone with his own disciples, he explained everything. Jesus was trying to explain to the Jewish people of the first century what God's love is like and how it works. This is the kingdom of God, God's love. And he did so with images that his listeners could relate to. On this occasion, he uses two images: the image of a sown grain growing by night and that of the mustard seed. Why did he mean by that? The grain has an internal, intrinsic dynamism that makes it grow without being noticed. If it's sown in good soil, it acts on its own. Such is the action of God. Grace acts slowly and mysteriously. This crashes with today's mentality. We want immediate results, and we want to see the results and measure them day by day, month by month, and year after year. Every company has indicators, has the famous KPIs, through which they evaluate their performance. It's good, it's necessary, it's useful, but this desire to control doesn't work with God's love. Our job is to sow, and then God will take care in His time to make it grow. It's not up to us to measure progress in God's love. In fact, when we begin to measure the apostolic or spiritual progress of our actions, then normally things begin to get a bit muddy. The second image, the mustard seed. Why did Jesus choose an ugly, relatively small, and extremely invasive plant like the mustard seed to compare it with the love of God? I believe he does so to astonish his listeners, and let me explain myself. First, the ugly appearance and invasive characteristic of the mustard plant. Pliny the Elder, in his book Natural History, says that mustard germinates immediately after being sown, and that it's almost impossible to eliminate it once it's planted. It's considered a weed. Once it's planted, it's really very, very difficult to get rid of it. It invades everything around it. A mustard seed wasn't a seed that anyone would want in their field or garden. If left alone, it becomes an impenetrable thicket. How does this relate to God's love? The ugly aspect. Many times, God acts in the midst of realities that are full of imperfections, but even so, grace finds its way and moves forward. The invasive characteristic. God's love permeates the whole reality of the human person. Faith is not only an aspect of Sunday manifestation, going to the temple to pray on Sunday, but the love of God invades and illuminates all other spheres of the person: family, work, hobbies, health, everything. Moreover, it's unstoppable. For the expansion of the kingdom of heaven, all it takes is a tiny seed to set in motion a whole movement, which once it's on its way is unstoppable. We must be confident that God's love is unstoppable. A second idea, the size of the mustard tree. Have you ever seen a mustard plant? While in some parts of the planet, such as the western United States, it can become almost 5 meters high, the variety that Jesus would have seen in Palestine was barely over 2.5 meters, and as we have said, it's not a pretty looking shrub. In any case, neither the Palestinian nor the Californian variety are, strictly speaking, trees. They are actually vegetables. For Jesus to have called this plant a tree, and even a big tree, is a bit ridiculous. If Jesus had said that this mustard seed in question, when planted, would have become a small tree, it would have been an exaggeration, yes, but as a figurative expression, it could be accepted by his listeners. The fact that Jesus describes the mustard tree as being of gigantic proportions suggests that Jesus either didn't know much about the mustard plant, which I don't think is the case, or that he spoke in this way just to draw attention, a ridicule explicitly intended, so that people hearing such an absurdity or exaggeration would understand the point Jesus was trying to convey. The size of the mustard seed in its very small beginnings can reach unimaginable, disproportionate, never thought of sizes. A third idea, the function of giving shade for the birds to nest. Once grown, the parable says, it becomes a tree in which the birds come and make their nest. In the Old Testament, when speaking of some mighty kingdom, it was often compared to a tree, since they are majestic and wonderful. A great kingdom used to be compared to the cedar of Lebanon, a really huge and majestic tree. When such a tree is cut down, its wood is used to make all kinds of wood products, or even the Old Testament temple. Jesus takes this Old Testament image to compare, in this case, the kingdom of heaven to a tree as well, as it was done in the Old Testament, with the difference that instead of comparing it to a wonderful and majestic tree, he compares it to the tree coming from the mustard seed, which, as we have said before, is rather the opposite, small and ugly. What then is the underlying message of the parable? The reference to birds taking shelter under mustard sounds a bit random, although it has a poetic ring to it. Jesus is referring to the Old Testament prophecy in which the birds nesting in trees represent different nations that find protection under the shadow of powerful leaders. In Ezekiel, that leader is Pharaoh. In Daniel, it's Nebuchadnezzar. He is referring to those ancient kingdoms that seem, in their time, indestructible. In the end, as the story shows us, all kingdoms are temporary. They come, they have their time or splendor, and then collapse. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Greece, Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, England, France, the United States, Russia. These are kingdoms that in their time seem to be invincible, but collapsed. If we had told a Roman citizen of the 2nd century that Rome was going to collapse and fall, it would have seemed absurd to him, and yet it did. The kingdom of God, however, in the end, is the only one that will prevail over all other kingdoms. Okay, applying this idea to a more personal and particular sphere, we could say that these kingdoms can also be all those human ambitions and safeties under which we shelter ourselves and on which we base our happiness, stability, and personal security, health, success, money, the pleasures of life, power, fame, and so on. In the end, these trees will fall, and we will realize that the tree that truly shelters us is the love of God. The shadow of the mustard tree is saying that in the end, the one who will save us and give us eternity is God, no one else. God's love is the most stable thing in the universe. Why did Jesus use the image of the mustard seed? Something that seems to us small, insignificant, ugly, invasive, or of relatively little value, imperfect, can become, in time, a great means of salvation. And God bless you.